What's the most satisfying act of I don't give a f that you have ever witnessed? I was in line at a coffee shop and the lady was complaining that they didn't have organic milk, and without a word or hesitation the guy behind the counter just said next please, not even taking her order. Back when I worked at a movie theater, one of my fellow assistant managers, Jack, had a constant attitude of not giving a f. He'd worked at the theater longer than anyone and was good friends with the general manager, so he got away with murder. One time this lady wanted a refund for a movie she'd finished watching. She was going crazy, screaming at us about how the movie was so inappropriate to be rated PG-13 and she couldn't stand all the swearing in the movie. I kept calmly trying to explain to her that since the movie was already over we couldn't give her a refund. Our policy clearly stated no refunds after 30 minutes into showtime. She's not hearing it, and looks to Jack now, like he will give her the answer she wants. He starts saying the same thing I did, and she interrupts him again with her yelling about how she couldn't stand all the swearing in the film. Jack rolls his eyes and just says well, that's just too effing bad, and walks off. Cue stunned look on my face and the ladies. My cashier in Amsterdam was literally just taking my groceries and sliding them across but not scanning them and then putting them into my bag. She scanned the last thing for like €2 and goes that'll be €2. She did not give even half of one F. My ex-boss had a customer throw her money on the counter when my boss clearly had her hand already out waiting to be given the money. So when my boss went to give the change, she just threw it back. Coins went everywhere but the look on the lady's face was priceless. Whenever I deal with customers, I just reciprocate what they do. Hand me your money. I hand it back. Put your money on the table. I put it on the table as well. I was at a restaurant recently. While I was waiting for my friends to arrive I noticed a few tables away. The lady was going on and on. I couldn't hear the exact words, but it was pretty obvious that they were having a heated argument where she was apparently scolding her and the guy was just sitting there having an occasional spoonful of his dessert. Exactly 3 minutes and he just stands up and walks away. He goes out of the restaurant, gets in his car and drives away. I was sitting at a table near the window facing the street, and the woman was in absolute shock. The look on her face was priceless. I mean, I shouldn't judge their relationship without context, but the guy sure didn't give a flying fart about what happened next. Didn't see it, but it was talked about at my old restaurant. My autistic friend was getting an interview for a second restaurant job. The chef doing the interview asked this question and got this response: I could be the biggest a-hole when things get heated. How do you feel about that? Well, if that's the case, then I don't want to work for you. Some Karen was beefing about a 25 cents off coupon. The coupon was for a 42 ounce bottle of something, but she wanted a 28 ounce bottle. The coupon was rejected when scanned, because there was no product to match it. There was nothing the cashier could do, but Karen just kept demanding 25 cents off. Finally, the guy ahead of me in line marched up to the counter, slapped a quarter down, and said, "There's your effing 25 cents off. Now pay your effing bill so the rest of us can go on with our days." Was living and working from home on a super busy street. One day I hear a ruckus out front. There's an SUV stopped in the middle of the road. The occupants apparently having a fight. No traffic could get by, and wouldn't you know it, like 10 cars back there's a deputy's car. Deputy walks up, already pissed off by the shape of his stride. Now I couldn't hear anything up to this point, but things got very loud. He demanded to know what the issue was. Driver wanted the passenger out of the car. Deputy asks the passenger, "Whose car?" Passenger begrudgingly says it's the driver's, but that they help pay for it. Deputy, "Out of the car." Passenger, "But, deputy, now, out." Passenger gets out, goes to stand on the curb as directed. Deputy, to the driver, "Drive." Passenger, "But how am I supposed to get home?" Deputy, "Walk." Turns, walks off into sunset. Seriously, that last walk was the coldest damn command I'd ever heard. The deputy was 1000% done with everyone's sh that day. Someone's girlfriend was cussing them out in the middle of mall. This dude called up his mate and asked to get a ride home and left her speechless. Don't know how that relationship ended up. In college we had this prof for physics who liked to pick on a few students. Basically me and a few others. We had an exam, and he would take off major points over trivial items. Cases where people were getting the correct answers but he didn't agree with our work. Like that. And we're talking getting 2/20 on a question, which pretty much fs you over. After insulting us, the prof gets up and solves a problem on the board, and made a trivial mistake, the kind of one that nearly caused us all to fail his class. One of the guys gets up, writes F on the board, flicks him off and walks off. Truly the hero we need. Had an inland flight about 3 years ago. This kid in the row behind me, prob 6-8 years old, started to kick my seat after takeoff. It was not a long flight, about 1.5 hours, but I hate this kinda so I turned around and sure enough, that brick was kicking my seat, while his mom and dad was sitting on either side of him, pretending to not notice. First I kindly asked the dad if he could make him stop, and he somewhat tried to convince his kid to stop. The kid sulked, but seemed to get the memo, at least for 1 minute, and then proceeded to kick my seat again. And once again I turned around, and this time, dropped the pleasantries, and told them that this was a golden opportunity to teach their kids some manners, as this is Norway, and some people are starting to feel more entitled than others. This didn't go that well, and mom started to yell at me, and that he is just a kid, and needs to express himself. It is at this moment the flight attendant arrives, and I try to explain the situation, while this kid's mom and dad tries to trivialize my complaint, by saying I'm the one who is making a scene. The flight attendant, not wanting any trouble as we are miles above ground, tries to explain that kicking the seat can be annoying and that we all should just get along. Flight attendant leaves, and kicking commences. So I simply picked up my stuff, walked to the row behind them, asked the woman behind them if she would be so nice to could move to the window seat, so I could get the middle seat. She just smiled and nodded. I sat down behind the kid, and started kicking for the 40-50 minutes that was left of the flight. TLDR kid was kicking the back of my seat. Parents didn't want to do anything about it, traded to a seat behind them, and started kicking the kid's seat. I got stuck in front of a seat kicker years ago. Not quite the same reaction from the mother or flight attendant, but just as useless. When we landed I went to get my stuff from under the seat and I find a kid's shoe there. I stuck it in my bag. As I'm getting off the flight they're still looking for the kid's shoe, which was going to be pretty hard to find since I tossed it in a trash can. I might be going to hell for stealing some kid's shoe in a petty fit of revenge, but it felt good at the time. At Costco this older gentleman was screaming at my boss because apparently all the handicap parking spots were occupied. My boss asked for his information so he could write a complaint. We had little forms for that. Nothing really official, mostly to shut up people. Are you a member? No. Well that it's then. My boss then put the little form in the garbage can and walked away. The old man was stunned. My location for work has 1k people being laid off in 5 weeks. We've basically started doing the bare minimum. We've been playing Cards Against Humanity and streaming TV shows. We do about 2 hours of work, then spend the next 7 messing around. Speaking of, I got to go. I'm hosting the next game. It was me doing it. I worked at a 24-hour restaurant. My shifts mostly were Thursday, Friday, Saturday and Sunday, 6 PM to 4 AM. The manager of the restaurant really believed I wanted his job, so he would write me up for the most ridiculous things. One time he wrote me up for a bad review from a customer, on a night that I wasn't even working. That one got him in trouble with the regional manager. Moving forward, it was a stupidly busy Saturday night. About 5:45 PM, I got into work and he met me with yet another write-up, this time for allowing the kitchen to run out of a particular item during my last shift. I didn't even do the orders, but apparently it was my fault. So, I went back to my car, took off my uniform, put on normal clothes I had in there, walked up to the kitchen counter where he was busy with the kitchen staff and some waitresses and waiters. He looked at me, told me what area I would be working that night. I looked him dead in the eye and said I don't think so. He said it again, and again I said I don't think so, this time handing him all of my uniforms. As I turned to walk out of the restaurant, he called out after me, "You can't do this. You are rostered on." I turned, pulled my height and said, "Oh honey, I can." And I just did, as I have been rostered for only 37 hours in total each week for the past 6 weeks. It is deemed I am part-time. As a part-time employee, I am only required to submit my resignation. I am not required to give you any notice. He called me about an hour later and begged me to go back. Yeah, F you mate, that's not happening. When I delivered pizza we had this older driver, prob in his 20s, who came back from a delivery and was pretty annoyed. A few minutes later the store got a phone call complaining about him. Essentially what happened was, a regular pie delivered was $11.97 and the person handed him $12 and asked for their change. He said okay, went back to his car and got 3 pennies and looked the woman in the eyes and rolled the pennies between her legs into her house and walked back to his car. One of my high school teachers was just before retirement. I remember on the day of the final exam he handed out the test papers, then sat down at his desk and read the newspaper, with it opened up all the way in front of him. He couldn't see us and vice versa. The smart girl in front finished first and just passed her paper back. It went all around the class. Not the first F was given by him on that day. One casual employee decided to stop using proper radio procedure. Instead of using his correct call sign he replied on the radio with Super John Smith, not his real name. He kept doing it all night despite dispatchers, supervisors and co-workers telling him to stop. He still works there and has outlasted hundreds of employees. I'd say his work-life balance is pretty good. I still call him Super John to this day. Bumped into an ex-GF of mine with her new fella in a restaurant. I had arrived on my own but was waiting for someone anyway. I see them and vice versa and they start giggling to themselves, probably discussing what I was doing on my own or whatever else. It was clear I was the butt of the joke. 15 minutes later my date arrives. Drop dead gorgeous 9/10 blonde. By far the best looking girl I ever dated. We exchanged pleasantries and were taken over to our table. I have never seen two people's expressions change so much in my entire life than when they saw me sit down with this girl. It was amazing. I felt like a superhero. I was once on a US military ship, having breakfast in the wardroom, officer's lounge, when the operations officer, ops, walks in. This guy was the definition of not a morning person. He's still half asleep, bleary-eyed, basically a zombie with a bagel. He sits down across from me to eat his bagel and is just barely conscious. My back is to the outboard side of the ship, and the morning sun is blazing in one of the portholes, putting a big bright A circle of light right on his barely conscious face. He's squinting and chewing and basically just remembering how to be alive for today. It's painful to watch, but then zombie ops stops chewing, slowly picks up the phone, and dials a bridge. In his well-known I'm still totally asleep voice, he says "EI, it's ops. Could you shift our barpet? Yeah, 165, thanks," and puts the phone down. And then he just sits there, squinting, waiting, and then, ever so slowly, I realize that big blazing spot of sun has begun to slide off the zombie's face and onto the wall behind him. After a moment it clears his face and he blinks slowly a few times and the brilliant beauty of what I've just witnessed begins to overwhelm me. By ordering the bridge to adjust the ship's back and forth patrol by about 15 degrees, he's changed our course just enough to reposition the sun off of his face. He's literally just redirected thousands of tons of steel and hundreds of people so that he could get the sun out of his eyes while he eats his bagel. I am in awe. He slowly picks up his bagel and for a moment I'm terrified at the thought that his own genius may escape him, that he may never appreciate the epic brilliance of his laziness, since he's not going to wake up for another hour. But between his next bites he pauses, looks at me, and gives me the faintest, sly grin, before returning to gnaw slowly on his zombie bagel.